Hello. I'm currently involved in an Australian cultural project to translate the entire Pali Canon into Australian bush ballads. I've only got 10 minutes, so... Now, bush ballads are a uniquely Australian form of poetry, and they're telling stories of the weird and wonderful people in the vast sun-baked outback of Australia. Bush ballads were usually recited in rough outback pubs and hotels. Now, I'll just explain a bit about Australian poetry. Australian poetry is actually a contact sport. And there are very few rules. So the eager young poet is reciting and evoking a scene, and the audience is cheering or booing or throwing things. And there's a traditional scoring system. So traditionally the audience try to aim for the poet's head, usually with a beer bottle. So it's 10 points for the head, 5 points for the body. Drawing blood or a knockout draws 20 points. So a knockout is when the poet falls and within a count of 10 he can't get back on his feet to resume the poem. He gets dragged off and the next poet comes in. Now, I know what you're thinking. That all sounds a bit harsh. And yes, a lot of poets do require hospitalisation. But it all goes to lifting the standard of poetry in Australia. So I want you all to be all to join in. Just imagine you're in a bush pub, and I'm reciting a poem, and we won't be throwing things. I'll just confirm that. But what we'll do is we'll have a practice. So we'll have a practice cheer. So what you do is if I get a rhyme really good, or a phrase really good, or an image really good, and you like it, you cheer and say good on you or whatever. So we'll have a practice cheer. Do you want some feedback? Now, ask yourselves, how loudly did you all individually cheer? We'll try that one again. That's more like it. Now we're going to try, if I get a rhyme really badly, or stretch the rhyme, or the phrasing is really terrible, or the poem's just bad, you boo and you hiss and you heckle. So we'll try that. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Brilliant. Now, I'm not a native Australian, but I'll try to do it with an Australian accent, but I tend to end up sounding like Dick Van Dyke in Mary Poppins, but we'll see how we go. A quick glossary of terms. A swag man is a solitary travelling man doing odd jobs and living off the land. A billy can is a tin can he makes his tea in. Bush tucker is food found in the bush. A snag is a sausage, and a vegetarian sausage. Billabong is a waterhole. A jackaroo is a cowboy, and a jillaroo is a cowgirl. So I've translated the sutta Nanda and the dove-footed nymphs. And I've called it Neville and the Sheilas with the pigeon's feet. It was the outback wedding of the year. Jackaroos and jillaroos had come from far and near to toast young Neville and his bride, a strapping lass who was his pride. Neville's mum a feast had made on neighbours' groaning tables, it was laid. Out in the paddock the barbie roared, and 1/2 ton of tucker it got gnawed. The very earth did gasp and groan under a kalpa's weight of cakes and scones. Suddenly a hush did break as a mysterious figure climbed o'er the paddock gate. It was the greatest swagman of them all. He wore a bedsheet for a shawl. He was the bloke who was awake with a faraway look and dreamlike state. In dumbstruck awe did Neville's mum clear a place for the guest with her apron on. A tinny and some snags would put at his disposal, and the bash resumed its beer-soaked carousal. I know, I agree. For a time the honoured guest just sat, fanning his brow with his akubra hat, then pushing the snags around the plate, bowed to the groom, saying, "Good day, mate." "I would be honoured, young Neville, if you'd care to stroll with me to the trees over there." Now Neville, who was not that bright, just scratched his head and said, "Yeah, all right." As the pair climbed o'er the paddock gate, Neville's bride cried, "Neville, you drongo, don't be late." She sucked her cigarette with a sigh, then pulled a ring from another tin and sucked it dry. Then she let out... It's all right, go ahead. Then she let out a belch that shook the trees, and Neville's tender heart did seize. Beneath his feet the ground did shake. "Where are we going?" he asked his mate. The swagman replied, "Carry me, Billy can, Neville's son. It's not much further to go along, and I'd be pleased to share the road." By sundown, at a far billabong, they rested their load. Thank you. The swagman said, "Around this spot many swagmen sit. With billy tea, damper and bush tucker they are replete. All night and day, whatever the weather, they sit and cogitate together. To be awake like yours truly is why these swagmen from shackles flee. There is a place for you among this mob. What do you say? Are you up to the job?" Now Neville, who was not that bright, just scratched his head and said, "Yeah, all right." So Neville stayed at the billabong. The swagman left, but was back before long. When he returned, the scene was not the same. One of the mob into his ear did complain. So after tea, as was the custom, nothing said, he threw an Anzac biscuit at Neville's head. When it bounced and hit the ground, the swagman left without a sound. As was the custom, Neville rose and went in the direction of that silent discontent. I agree. A bit away from the billabong, the swagman spoke before too long. "What's this about you begging in your wedding suit? And I hear you've got a solid gold billy to boot." "'Struth, only 9 carats on me oath, and I look a real stud muffin in my coat," cried out Neville in despair. "Next you be wanting me to cut my hair." The greatest swagman of them all just said, "Son, as for the mullet, it can stay on your head. But an old billy can and a bedsheet are for a swagman fit. Get one from the hotel, one stained and torn a bit. They'll have no further use of it." Now Neville, who was not that bright, just scratched his head and said, "Yeah, all right." So Neville stayed at the billabong. The swagman left, but was back before long. When he returned, the scene was not the same. One of the mob into his ear did complain. "That pasty-faced little git, he's always going on about it. Our brahmacharya vows are taking a pasting with all his talk about fornication." So as the custom demanded, into his mitt a biscuit was handed. I lost my place now, hang on. With extra force it flew through the air and embedded itself in the drongo's hair. When alone and away from the mob, Neville shook out his hair and let out a sob. "It's for me bride, me heart does burn. She's got thighs like tree trunks for which I yearn. They're like the sides of beef Mum keeps in the freezer, and the rest of us not so bad either. You could build a house with that wench and have some left over for the garden fence." With an upward roll of his eyes and a quiet groan, the swagman reached for his mobile phone. He dialed Tushita 2888, and into it arrangements he did make. Then taking Neville by the neck, he flew to the Tushita Hotel in less than a sec. Get your eyes in gear, Neville lad, and you'll see some delights yet to be had. The first thing Neville noticed was the beer was free. Then something caught his eyes and made them see. Exactly. For the Tushita Hotel was full to the brim of Sheilas drinking lemon and gin. But that was not what made him gawp and bleat. It was that the ends of their legs they had pigeons' feet. Well done. I never thought that I would see a sight more quaw and lovely than thighs like sides of meat, but pigeons' feet have got them beat. Cogitate hard, get some insight in your head, and these Sheilas are yours. Enough said. Said the swagman with a grin and a wink. Now Neville only needed a nanosecond to think. He grinned and winked and said, yeah, all right, because on occasion Neville could be bright. So Neville stayed at the billabong. The swagman left, but was back before long. When he returned, things were not the same. He's a pervert, the mob began to defame, and gradually, as the night grew dark, they told the swagman of that dull little spark. I cogitate for pigeons' feet I cogitate, is all the little git will relate. So he told him to sling his hook, and he did. Saddened the swagman only frowned, wishing he had a biscuit in his hand. And Neville's head... Thank you, I agree. And Neville's head to bounce it off. He stayed silent as the mob did scoff. So Neville was gone from the billabong. The swagman left singing a sad, sad song. Then one hot day on a dusty track, the swagman thought a twig did crack. He searched the tree line with his eyes and spied Neville emerging through a cloud of flies. In his stained old bedsheet he looked apart, and something sang in the swagman's heart. For he had that faraway look and dreamlike state. Truly, there was another bloke who was awake. Neville nodded to the swagman, saying, "Good day. I've waited many an hour for you to come this way." Then Neville spoke with a knowing grin about the liberation he did win. "There'll be no need from this time hence to put those pigeon-footed Sheilas to any inconvenience." Thank you, you're very kind. He said with a tear of joy in his cheek, "So, swagman, mate, your trick worked a treat." The swagman just chuckled and kicked out a leg, and down the road did waltz a peg. So full of joy at Neville's fate, he just waved his hand and said, "No worries, mate."